So that's nice, you're down under.
Yes,
So
yes.
this is very bizarre.
Yeah,
We are sharing a session with that. There's
okay.
nobody in there
Yeah.
now, yes. And when we're done, there's not gonna be anybody in here. Why the fuck weren't we all in there the whole time?
Well, that is a good question. I don't understand any of these things. I just show up and
Where did they-
and put
why
my-
is that? I don't know. I just started. I said, did you check out whether you can oh, you sent me out. I said it on your Gmail now.
All right, for those of you following along at home, my co-chair is busy discussing business for a different working group. It's all right, I'm just making fun of you.
Oh,
But we will be getting started in just a moment.
okay.
It is time, 1 minute past starting time.
You're late. God damn it, I had beer.
Ah,
I claim beer.
beer. Beer is a good excuse. All right.
Came off that.
While we're here, let's flip to the note well, which everyone can read upside down, of course. I'm sure you all know it well by now. Welcome to the Jmap session. We have 6 remote people and looks like around about 9 in the room, which is higher than average.
I guess I need to sit up here.
You probably should.
Is it going all slightly like this?
There you go. You're welcome. Well, we're in the Northern Hemisphere now. Yeah.
Fresh water for me?
Yes.
Wow, thank you.
I hear it tastes pretty awful, but
It doesn't taste as good as the Péché Mortel beer that I just had.
see, this is going to be a great session. Welcome, everybody. Blue sheets are making their way around. We have a rough agenda, 15 minutes on Jmap Core, 15 minutes on Jmap Mail, 20 minutes to talk about extensions, and 10 minutes for any other business. This is obviously fairly rough, and we'll see how we go with that.
Yes.
But let's get started with Core. And we have, Neil is somewhat awake, so if you feel like speaking to any of this, Neil, put your virtual hand up and I'll pop you up there. So the main question for today is, do we need a registry of error types? There's lots of info there on the slides.
Alexei is going to, this is tangled, there we go. This is Barry. As participant, my general view of these is that we create the registries when we decide we need them. And if we don't think we need them now, we can defer the creation to later.
Do we have information about whether this is likely to be extended?
Whether Jmap's likely to be extended, very much likely to be. Whether new error types will be defined, they would only be defined within the documents that.
Okay. Well, so if looking at IMAP response codes, we know that these are, turned out to be way more extensible than we originally thought. Yeah, my recommendation, I don't have a strong opinion here, but my preference would be just to make this into a registry if we think it's going to be extensible.
All right. So I guess the question there, Alexi, is should we do it right now or should we do it when we start extending? Are there any strong reasons, one or the other?
Would you like some text on this? Yeah, I think it's half a page of text. I don't think this is going to be particularly difficult. We have plenty of examples of similar type of information. So, Chris, do you think we should have a registry for error types in Jmap?
I don't feel. Oh, sorry. Chris Newman. I'm willing to write the text to create one if the group feels it's necessary. I don't feel it's necessary at this point.
All right.
So
So, yeah.
this is Barry. I'll repeat that I think we should just defer it until we have an extension and then have the extension define the registry.
Yeah. This reminded me of something else, partially related. At least earlier version of the document had lots of error types defined for different methods. And it was very hard to review and figure out whether they were supposed to be the same and just some didn't apply to some of the methods, or whether it was a single set. Having a single registry would help, but I know it's sort of one particular thing of trying to review and maybe implement and figure out what applies or not.
All right, we've got Neil here. Neil GE. There we go. You should be up now, I think. Neil, no, that didn't. There we go. Now you are.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Alexei, I've read on it in the spec since I think you looked at it then, because they are now all together in the spec of like, these are the standard errors that are returned for any of the methods. It's only if there's one that's very specific to a particular method is that just with that method. So they are already grouped together, I think, in the spec. My feeling is it seems to be most people don't seem to think we need one of this registry. And based on the IMAP experience, we think we have a fairly good idea of what classes of errors we're going to get, and so we have those covered. It's unlikely that we're going to get completely new ones up here, but if we do, then that's the point when we create an extension and create a registry for them.
All right. The summary of that seemed to be they're together in the document, more easily findable now. And Neil recommends that we add a registry when we need it rather than straight away as well.
Defer till later.
Defer till later. All right.
Can anyone not live with deferring? Okay, then.
Alexi's right on the edge. All right.
I reserve the right to say I told you so, but that's fine.
All right.
I'm okay with that.
Moving on to the next thing, push subscriptions. Yep.
We do have, sorry, I lost track of the Jabber Room for a moment, but Dave Crocker in the Jabber Room says registry is infrastructure. Get it working now to avoid the transition effort later. A section of the RFC means, so then there's some discussion about that, but Jeff PC says same sort of thing can be accomplished by having a section in the RFC listing all error types. And Dave says a section in the RFC means that adding a value requires reissuing the RFC. So Dave is in favor of doing the registry now rather than later. But Dave, do you want to die on that hill, or can you live with deferring?
Chris.
Why don't I resolve this? I'll just write the text. If I get it in time, then we're good.
All right. So Chris is going to write the registry of errors text. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Now moving on to push subscriptions. So this is Neil's text from the slide there. There have been quite a few changes, and the remaining question, careful with that, is should we add the ability to request pushes only if there are particular states of records? And this is things like if a unseen message arrives in a mailbox, pushing then, but maybe not pushing if something gets moved between folders. Not seeing any huge amount of people jumping up to the microphone over this. Thanks, Alexi.
I don't know. My coworker just asked for something very similar for our implementation. It's like, yeah, I just fail to be excited one way or the other, but you know. So are you asking about suppressing, or do you want to have more information in notifications to let the consumer decide?
Generally suppressing the pushes. A common case that we run into is where you have an alerts folder that's receiving an email every 30 seconds all day, and you don't want your phone to wake up for that just to say there's nothing's changed in the inbox.
Right, I guess the idea would be that you tell it what pushes you want and it doesn't send you the others.
Right.
All right.
Neil, go.
I just wanted to, just clarify. So generally, you at the moment you can just register which.
Neil, please speak slowly because your voice is very muddy.
Okay, sorry. At the moment, you can register for which types you care about. So if there was an extension that had calendars as well, and you're only making a mail client, you don't need to receive pushes for calendar types. But yes, you would receive any time there's any change to, say, any email. And could be a lot of changes that are not what the app is doing if the only reason it's receiving the out-of-band pushes is notifications in your inbox from said. And I don't know if there's a situation where the device might start penalizing it if it wakes up too much as well, because they often have kind of restrictions on how much could be woken up in the background. But it could be pretty expensive because the server would have to look at all of the changes, evaluate them against the filter, and then work out whether that whether to send a push or not. So I think it would probably have to be optional, and optional stuff is always a bit of a pain.
Yeah, this might be a good idea for an extension, especially if you want to
potentially
specify some kind of filter language for invoking notifications. That might be a good extension.
Yeah, I think the idea was that we would reuse the same syntax as used filtering when doing a query. But maybe leave it out and have it as an extension. At least then you can advertise if you support it.
So to summarize here, the suggestion is that we have a push built in that pushes everything and an extension that then allows you to specify a new type of push, which is a filtered push that only pushes some things. That sounds like a good proposal. Keeps this one simple. All right, next we have explicit query totals. This is my one. I sent it to the mailing list just recently, last week. Basic philosophical argument here is that the server shouldn't do any work that the client doesn't need. Things like the recent flag and the unseen on select in IMAP are examples of things that the server is required to do, even though the client might not care, and that require additional code complexity and additional work on the server. And so the next part of that is that the client should explicitly ask for the things that it needs rather than either having the server do speculative work by default or not even having a way to turn it off, as is a case we've run into with CalDAV, where if you're using the CalDAV protocol to restore things from backup onto your server, it will send out scheduling messages and you can't even tell it not to, because the protocol has an implied behavior that you can't turn off. The disadvantage, of course, of making totals optional is that it's added complexity because there are multiple different cases, and it's added complexity for client authors that need to explicitly ask for the totals if they want them. So there's been some discussion about this already, and a fairly split set of opinions on it because there are strong arguments in favor of both. Any thoughts on this?
Alexei, with my client implementer hat on, I think we shouldn't. We should just make it make the client request it. Don't make the server do it. Unseen is a very good example in IMAP where some clients do care and most clients don't care. And over time, the clients that don't care probably has increased. So it's sort of hard to take this stuff out.
Neil?
Yeah, so as kind of with my client author hat on, I would be fine dealing with the complexity if I'm going to get a big performance win from the server. If it's not going to be that much faster, then it seems not worth adding. So I think this really is a question of do we have either any data or at least knowledge based on existing server implementations that it's going to be a lot faster if we don't require the totals for some requests.
Okay, Chris?
Chris Newman. Now I've had time to sleep on this issue properly. I think the proposal I'd make is we go with the client has to ask for it, but we also have a line that says servers are strongly encouraged to implement an efficient way to compute this if possible.
That sounds like a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
Can anyone not live with that?
All right. And look, we've got Neil again.
Why don't you just, don't dismiss him unless.
I don't. I haven't dismissed him. He's leaving.
Sorry, I should have kept myself on. I can certainly live with that. I just wanted to ask if anyone has one of my suggestions on the list. If
Sorry, you're breaking
the value.
up too much. You're not getting it.
Neil, if you can switch your video off, that might help.
Yeah.
Or type it in Jabber.
Yeah, or type it in Java. Well, he's got the video off, so.
Is that better?
Oh, that's hugely better.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, suggested on the list, which is the total, even if it's not requested, it could just earn it, because, for example,
Okay. It got,
It's not better.
unbetter. It got unbetter. Try just typing in Jabber and we'll channel it.
okay.
Sorry about that. It's that upside down
Yeah,
network.
it's blame Telstra in general.
Former British colonies.
Yeah. Oh man. Or the exit.
So Neil says if the server just has the data available, I suggested on the list, just return it. So the issue I have with that is then we're inconsistent. That I would rather have predictable results, that when you ask for something, you get a certain thing, and when you don't ask for it, you get a certain thing. Chris.
Yeah, Chris Newman. My problem with that is I have seen way too many implementation by testing against one server, and if it works against that server, assume it works with all the others. And that's just too common. So I don't think that's a good choice.
Yeah, it's comparative thing is list special use in IMAP. A lot of servers will return the special use now, whether requested or not. And there are clients out there that assume that behavior and break if you don't return the special use data, even if it wasn't requested.
Right.
Yes, it's a real thing.
So Neil J.E. has said, that's fair, okay, I retract that suggestion. And Neil J.H. says, as a client author, I have no problem with requiring a flag. I know computing that count can be expensive. It's been expensive to do so locally in clients I've worked on.
Yeah, this is particularly interesting if we then had an extension that allowed you to have a best effort sort rather than an exact sort, where you could say, just go find me 30 matches now and give me them with a state string that lets me know what I've already returned, so that I can then return the next page and so on. This is the best effort match search engine type of case where there's a pool of messages of unknown size. I can see Jmap being useful for this kind of thing if you don't have to calculate the totals, but if you do have to calculate the totals, it suddenly becomes very difficult to know exactly what may or may not match in your pool of messages. All right, so it looks like we've come to a conclusion that having the client explicitly ask for the total if it wants it is reasonable, but giving the total if you haven't been asked for it is then not good. Cool. Let's move on to the last call page.
One
Sorry,
second.
yep.
From Jabber, Stuart Brandt says, is there a constraint to what counts the server should have available? eSearch/count opens the door to arbitrary counts, which can be tough for a server.
This is exactly the same in Jmap where you do a query with a filter. Obviously, a filter of in mailbox, you might have an efficient count for, but in mailbox and matches from Barry is probably less likely to have a pre-calculated count up front, though a server that was clever enough to cache common queries might say, well, I've been asked for how many messages I had from Barry every 5 minutes for the last 24 hours. Maybe I'll preemptively keep that cache up to date for a while.
Obviously, you should always keep the count of messages from Barry up to date.
Yeah. All right. So last call. Do we think we are ready to proceed towards there soon? We have just this couple of outstanding issues which we've, I think, agreed a path forward for all of them. Is there anything else that people see blocking us from going to last call? Working group last call.
The correct answer to that question is no, of course.
Well, the correct answer is no if you don't see anything that's blocking us. I'm not seeing a vast number of people jumping up. So we will proceed to working group last call once we've integrated these changes then.
Yahoo!
All right. Next, Jmap mail. There are 3 items in here, starting with the email groups. This discussion's been happening on the mailing list. This is an example of how it looks. Latest conclusion from the mailing list seems to be that we do need to support email groups, and the question is whether this is the correct way to do it. It's basically either this or a 2-level system, which some of the libraries use. They group it into either the unnamed set or named group sets.
Alexei, I think this is quite similar to what IMAP is doing, right, in body structure. It uses nils for various special purposes. So I know, I mean, I wouldn't quite call it a hack, but I think that's reasonable.
All right, good. We're happy then, that's done. Things to take to be extensions, and we've added a new thing to that, which is the filtered push. Vacation response will be separated out from the main email or main mail spec into a separate extension, and search within attachments was optional, so moving that into an extension.
Can you remind me, I think, initially there was a big part of the discussion about why you really wanted vacation in there and why you're moving it out. I don't mind either way. I just want to know whether somebody asked for it to be removed or.
Just to reply to Jeff on Jabber for a second here, back on the previous thing, which was wouldn't name of the group and then email and a list of emails work. The problem there is that the individual emails also have a name associated with them. So you wind up, that's basically the 2-level hash or 2-level array where you have an array of group name to addresses, the address specs that are associated with it, which is another way to do things, but it makes it more complex in the basic case where you would then have a top-level no name. Oh, yeah, he's saying, yeah. See, ignore. It's all a hack. Cool. Vacation response. Neil J.E., did you have a response to that? Why? The main reason we wanted it up front, I believe, was that various client and server authors thought it would be a good hook to convince their management to build a protocol that had a standard way of setting vacation responses. But if we have this at the same time as a common extension, then it's still quite easy to add to both clients and servers as a reason to use Jmap. Though on the next page, we're going to be talking about full civ, which is making sure that you can do full civ and vacation without them stomping on each other will be an interesting question. For those of you who couldn't see it, that was Alexei going, okay.
Yeah, Alexei grimaced. This is Barry. My general view is that if we expect an extension to be sufficiently commonly supported, we should include it in the base. Chris?
Yeah, Chris Newman, I would have a slight preference for just adding a capability name for vacation, but leaving it in the base spec. Because then you end up with an example of an extension in the base spec. However, we do want to make sure we've got the civ interaction sorted.
Yes.
I will say our server supports full civ and has a legacy vacation mechanism, and we've worked out making that work together. So it's a solvable problem.
All right, so I guess the decision point here is, are we happy with pulling these things out and making them extensions rather than requiring them to stay in the base spec?
Well, I think we actually were leaning the other way on vacation and saying that we would like to put it in the base spec as an optional feature so that we have the extra capability, the extension mechanism, and one example of it in the base spec, but it's clearly labeled as an
Yeah, that's
as an optional feature.
what Neil just said on Jabber as well. All right. And Neil, you're happy with doing that? Yep, he thinks that's fine.
Yes.
Cool. In that case, are we close enough to say we're going to go to last call for mail as well?
So one more rev and then we'll
Yeah, one more rev
Yep.
that takes this feedback into place. I'm seeing some nodding and nobody jumping up to say otherwise. Fantastic.
and a hat in the back with his email in front of him.
Sorry, we're talking about.
Yeah, well,
The blue sheet's floated around somewhere if you want. All right. Moving on to Jmap extensions, and we're pretty much exactly on time here. We're half an hour into the session and we're half an hour through our time. So
the chairs
Great.
are great, aren't they?
they are doing
Let's hear it
a
for the
fantastic
chairs.
job here. Yeah, lovely. And here's the first question. Do we need to update the charter? Our deliverables at the moment are just core and mail plus supporting documents and tools, but they don't explicitly call out extensions as something that's in charter for this group. We'd planned to recharter for calendar and contacts, but maybe just updating the charter to say extensions to Jmap are in scope will give us.
Yeah, I would be happy to see a charter that said we're doing calendar, contacts, and other general extensions as accepted by the working group, if the IESG would be okay.
Yeah, I think we're going into bike shed now because I'm sure ISG will have opinion one way or the other. I don't
Right.
know quite yet which
The
way,
question
but
is, can we manage a general extensions charter, or are we going to have to be specific about which extensions we want to take?
I think opinions differ. Some people don't like very open-ended charters, and other people. I mean, it sort of depends whether you have a list of specific extensions you already know about, and if you can put them in the charter saying, we are going to work on this first, and then we might recharter, or you can take others once you're done with this. That might be more agreeable.
We certainly have at least two.
Yeah.
Listed here.
As a general comment, I think rechartering is not going to be a problem. Just my gut feel.
All right. So the next step here then is to propose updated charter wording. Cool. I will do that.
Okay.
Next, Ken. He gave me like 50 slides, so you got 5
You know the
minutes.
drill, pink box.
All right, so the genesis of this was a colleague had asked about Jmap over WebSockets, and I happened to be playing with WebSockets for something else. So I hacked up some code in the Cyrus Jmap implementation and wrote up a 0.0 draft to document what I did, and Alexi found it interesting, so here we are.
Oh, sorry. You got the clicker there, have you?
Yeah. So it's pretty much a straightforward sub-protocol of WebSockets akin to what XMPP does. I set it up so it only does API requests. Uploads and downloads still use their own separate URL. And all the messages going back and forth over WebSockets are JSON only. Not everything fit on the slide.
Yeah, sorry.
One of the benefits, two main benefits that we found with this, one of which is you get bidirectional compression using the WebSocket compression extension, where currently with Jmap, I don't believe there's any browsers that compress request bodies. If there are, please let me know. There's also a little bit less, lower overhead because you don't have every single API request being authenticated. Authentication is done upfront one time as part of the WebSocket handshake, and using the standard handshake mechanisms for HTTP1 and HTTP2, which I believe this is currently in the IRC editor queue. Discovery, very simple. We added a WS URL property to the session object. At this point, I didn't have any other parameters or limits that went along with this, but I suppose if there were, we could create a new capability object for WebSockets if we found the need. Sample discovery, hit the endpoint, and there's the URL that you want to use. Example handshake for those that maybe haven't seen how this works. It uses the HTTP1 upgrade mechanism. There's a specific WebSocket headers, sub-protocol, Jmap, and in this particular case, it's trying to negotiate compression. And comes back with the 101, and you're ready to rock and roll at that point. Similar for HTTP2, it uses a modified connect method, which is signified or signaled by the particular bit in the settings frame. There's the connect. The big difference with using WebSockets HTTP2 is there's never a, at the end of each request, there's no end, I'm trying to think what the flag is now. And there's no end stream until you actually close the WebSocket. Okay, a couple issues that I've run across as I was implementing this. Because everything is JSON, you can't have the typical HTTP response line, the status line come back. So any top level errors related to bad JSON or what have you needs to be in a JSON problem details object, which I think Neil has recently added to his spec. One question I had was, do we need to have a way to signal to the client what object is being returned, whether it's an actual response object or a problem details object? My initial thought was the client probably could just figure it out based on context of what's in there. But that's an open-ended question. This first point here was something Neil brought up. I currently have this implemented where everything is processed in order, just like you would with normal Jmap. If we move this forward, we want to have out-of-order processing. And if so, obviously we need a way to indicate which response has been sent back. Simple ID property in the response, excuse me, in the request and the response will do that. And the other issue would be because this connection is open all the time, Should we allow push notifications to come down? Again, similar question with this. Would we need to have some way of indicating what type of object we've sent down the socket? That's pretty much it. Any questions, comments? Alexi? So, is this something that the working group would want to take on as work? Seem useful? Is it garbage?
Sounds like a good thing to put in rechartering.
Yeah, I would agree. There's one question that came up for me here, which was the WSURL property on the
Yep.
Jmap session object.
Yep.
Are we allowing extensions to put things in there because they haven't yet been requested by using? So if we add anything other than underneath the key for the extension,
If I'm not mistaken, core says that there may be other properties in the session object and the client should
ignore
them.
if it doesn't recognize them. Okay.
But
Because the other possibility would be to put them under the capabilities key for that
Yeah.
particular capability and put the
I've
WSURL
gone
inside
back,
that.
I've gone back and forth as to whether or not the URL should just be within the WebSocket capability.
Yeah. The argument for that certainly is that then it's quite clear what it belongs to, and it means there's no namespace collision issues if someone else defined something else that had a WS prefix and decided WSURL was a good name. That could
Fair
be an
enough.
issue.
Chris?
Yeah, I'd prefer it to be in the extension part of the tree. I know it's a little bit more annoying to parse because it's an extra layer, but the advantage you get the registry advantage of there's
Right.
already a registry for
And
those. So.
then we've got the container to put any other limits or parameters.
Mhm.
Anything else? Nope.
So
All right. Thank you.
who would be interested in implementing this? Should we do it? We got a couple of hands in the room. Would Fastmail be interested?
That is fast enough.
Oh, that is Fastmail. So we have Fastmail and ISO.
Yeah.
I guess that's enough to start.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Hi. Quelqu'un n'a pas signé les papiers bleus? Has anyone not signed the blue sheet?
The usual suspect. All right, vacation response, we now have an answer for that, so we can skip straight through. Edit Civ, a more general allowing you to manage the full Civ on the server. If we're going to support Civ, then we want a way to manage Civ via Jmap rather than having to call out to the managed Civ protocol, which is awful and horrible. I have been tempted to put managed Civ support in IMAPD many times with just create an IMAP command to allow people to push their Civ script rather than having to authenticate separately and do all this anyway. Would there be interest in having ability to manage your Civ via Jmap?
Sort of the managed Civ
I'm seeing,
extension.
yeah, the managed Civ extension for Jmap. It means we can use all the existing things. All right, does somebody want to write this? Thank you.
I presume Chris is not volunteering to write it, but Chris.
Yeah, so it definitely interests me because we implemented managed Civ and it's horrible, and I'm not sure anybody uses it or uses our implementation of managed Civ. So that's kind of annoying when you implement a protocol and nobody uses it. But that raises the question of I'm dubious. I'm not sure I've seen Civ editing interfaces that deployed successfully, period. I've seen Civ used a whole lot on the server side. I've not seen a lot of client side Civ.
But how are the server-side Civ scripts created?
Text editors,
Not by my mother, in other words.
exactly.
Typically, there are simple generators that are just a set of rules, set of tests, and set of actions, which can generate subset of whole Civ scripts,
Right.
but they cannot edit.
Right. That's what I've seen as well. Ken?
Ken Murchison, so Chris's question got me somewhat confused. When you say edit civ, we're actually talking about a way to interact and edit
A way
with the
to
script,
actually.
or are we just talking about pushing and pulling
No,
full
we're-
scripts?
Right, well, we're not talking about the user interface for editing the script, but we're talking about a way to take edited scripts and send them to
Right,
and
so,
from the server.
so it is managed civ over Jmap
Right.
essentially.
But what we've been discussing so far says that nobody does that. They just use some sort of UI that creates a script.
So the real question, I guess the first thing is, there seems to be enough interest in this that we should add it to our recharter as a thing we would like to investigate and produce.
I don't think we need to add that to the recharter. I think what we need to do is discuss it further, decide whether we want to include it in the recharter.
Yeah.
If the working group does decide this is worth doing and my boss is willing to give me some time, I'd volunteer to write this up.
Thank you, Ken.
So ask your co-chair if he wants to give me some time to.
Ned comments that systems that support full sieve editing are rare. And I would say extremely rare to the point of being bleeding.
The fastmail system has a powerful rule builder that lets you do sets of rules in particular places, and then you can go to the advanced screen and it has the spots where your rules will get filled into the final sieve script, and you can inject arbitrary sieve between each section.
Right.
So you can add your custom sections as well. Obviously compile tests that before letting you save it.
And Rafael Wazana says sieve handling, even partially, would be great. And Rafael, I'd ask you to expand on that because that's too vague for us to really know what you're getting at.
All
And
right.
here comes Rafael.
Yes, thank you. So my point is that Sieve Handling will be a very good customer feature, but I think it's pretty complex to have the full feature set done and to have a nice interface to show the rules. So maybe just a subset of what does Sieve, such as what is doing a run cube, for example, on Sieve with just simple rules with one condition and one action can be sufficient and a good thing to implement.
Okay, well, I mean, that's what we've basically been talking about, that there's a lot of very specific usage of being able to use a UI to select certain options. But there's very little general take a Sieve script and move it around and manage it and let people create arbitrary Sieve scripts. Are you saying that the former is okay, or are you saying you need the general management of Sieve scripts?
No, I think I agree. General is too complicated. Just a simplified version would be good.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we will keep discussing this one on the mailing list. We don't have a conclusion that's close enough to say take any particular path at this point. So we'll punt on this one for now. Generating MDN, message delivery notifications. Is this something that there are people interested in implementing?
So this will be extension to message submission by specifying few bits and just sort of that auto-generate MDNs for you from there?
I believe so, yes.
Right.
Rafael says we are.
Yes, I think I already, yes, I still have a microphone. So yeah, we already implementing an extension of, at this time that was the send messages to have, to be able to send MDN. So I think we'll be interested in generating MDN and why not do an extension for that, yes.
All right. I'm sure we would implement it in our server as well. Who wants to write it up?
I'll ask for volunteers on
Yeah.
this.
That sounds reasonable. Okay.
It sounds like something we will go ahead with.
Single HTML body. We discussed this one in London. Haven't done anything with it since, but the general concept was if you have a dumb client that just renders HTML and that's all, then if you throw it HTML that has CID links in it, it needs some way to resolve them and fetch the data. So it's going to have to understand blob IDs and understand quite a lot of Jmap. Do we want to have a way of asking the server to generate you an HTML body that's self-contained, contains either HTTP links that will fetch, that have all the authentication in them, will fetch that blob from the server somehow, or even just encoded as data URIs directly into the HTML blob? Here, render this thing in an iframe or a div, and it will show you the message as it's meant to be presented. That's a read-only property on a message that could be quite useful for dumb clients that don't want to be a full Jmap client. They just want a way to get some data and display it. Yeah. The hard bit here is going to be specifying how to generate this piece of HTML and any security considerations for it. Because when you're putting some arbitrary blobs together from the server and making a single HTML
And make sure you work with eFail correctly.
Neil Jenkins says, wary of building something we think might be useful without anyone that actually wants it.
Chris Newman, just wondering if anybody had standardized web. I'm not enough in the web community to know the answer to this question, but if anybody had standardized on a web archive file format. Because I know a lot of browsers offer a saved as web archive, so you get the whole picture with images and everything in one blob.
I don't know, what I've generally seen is you save the web page and zip it.
So Neil Jenkins says that generally generates a zipped folder of reference files rather than something that you can just render directly.
Jeff says, if I remember correctly, there was someone in dispatch 1 or 2 meetings ago with that proposal. Yeah, Alexei says signed archive, signed packages.
All right, so it feels like the conclusion on this is keep a record of the suggestion somewhere, but no, we don't need this just yet because there's nobody clamoring for it.
And time check, we have roughly 10 minutes.
Which is good because we're nearly at any other business. Search inside attachments. This was originally in scope for the main mail spec and has been separated out. I don't know how much is needed on this, whether we already have text on it, but who wants to take this? Neil J.E. didn't seem too keen to do it.
The only thing I want to ask about this is what does attachments mean in this context?
I guess,
So,
yeah.
I mean, we all kind of vaguely know what we're talking about. If I have a text message with a PowerPoint attachment, do I search the PowerPoint? But let's, in more cases, if I have a multi-part message with multiple text parts, how many of them are attachments? How many of them are not? What's the scope of this? What happens if it's multi-part alternative? Is there a difference in how it's searched and so on? Chris.
Okay, so 2 issues with this. The first one, I submitted a change that got accepted to the way to the wording for the body search. It actually makes Jmap's body search work a little bit more like IMAP's, because IMAP has this text which says it says the message, the body of the message contains this text, and it also says servers aren't required to return matches for non-text body parts. That's what the IMAP spec says. There are IMAP implementations that do return matches
Right.
for non-text body
And there-
parts.
Right, and there are plenty of IMAP
And
implementations that do
And
search
so,
entirely different
so we
ways.
changed the base spec, so now Jmap body search follows that model. So you don't have to return matches and attachments, but you can.
So I like the approach that we don't call it attachments, but we call it non-text body parts. And that makes it a little clearer what we're talking about.
Right, yeah. But that's the way it's worded
Yeah.
now in the base spec after that suggestion landed, which if anybody objects to, they should speak up.
So here's a question related to that and how IMAP is implemented. In IMAP, the IMAP spec clearly says that the search string is it's a substring match.
Right, we do not want to say substring. That was a designer and IMAP, and a lot of implementations ignore that.
Excellent.
Yes.
Because I think we say that how the match is done is implementation dependent, and that's the way it ought to be.
Yes, that is where we must deviate from IMAP because IMAP clearly got it wrong.
Yeah.
Bon.
All right. So this becomes search for non-text body parts.
Search inside non-text
Search
body parts,
inside
yeah.
non-text body parts. And we'll take it to the list for volunteers to write this up.
Yeah, I'd kind of suggest that this isn't actually needed anymore with that change to the base spec.
Okay.
I kind of agree with that. Do we really think the client would explicitly ask or not ask for this kind of search? I think the
Now,
client just asks for a search.
I will give you a little piece of information. We have a mail user interface that used a proprietary channel to do search in attachments and present thumbnails of the attachments that matched. And the marketing people at the time really liked that UI. And as far as we can tell, no customers care about it. So our implementation experience is this isn't needed, but it was implemented once. So
What do you think about some text in there that says simply that searching non-text body parts may be expensive, and it's up to the server whether to do that extra searching or not?
Well, the other way to do it would be to just have a capability in the base spec that says, by the way, this server searches non-text attachments.
Neil comments, the only thing that might be interesting is being able to get which mine parts were matched on the search.
Right.
And then Chris answered that, so. Okay.
All right, good. Any other business?
And so if there's no other business, we thought we would go back to the previous conversation about the null termination crap stuff thing. Pete, you want to pipe up? Neil, you want to pipe up? One of you? Pete's sitting there in the corner saying, no, leave me out of this. Dave Crocker says on the previous issue, the discussion is assuming that users will know what non-text means. They won't. PowerPoint is text in their minds, I suspect. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's right about that, and the question is what users expect when they do a search, so.
Well, the text that's in the spec now says text/star and message/star.
But Dave's
body
point-
types other than text/star
Right,
and
but Dave's point is
message/star.
that doesn't really answer the question because it's a question of what users expect.
Yeah, well,
When
like
I say search for Dave Crocker in my messages, and I have in there a PowerPoint that mentions Dave Crocker or a PDF that was written by Dave Crocker, I would want that to match as a user. And it's not a question of how you tell it to the geeks, it's a question of what the user
Right,
expects.
and our IMAP server can be configured in multiple ways to return that.
Yeah,
So it may be that the right answer is just to have a discussion about this in the text and let servers decide what they can afford to do based on the expense of the search.
So just to reply to Dave's thing there about users, the users probably wouldn't be presented with IETF URN params
Right.
supports attachment search. They would get something that tells them this server is only capable of searching some parts of the message, or this server is capable of searching all parts of the message, because
Right.
unless we require every server to support decoding images and finding and
Well,
doing text matches on them.
But there is a difference between supporting matching text parts, not supporting searching images and videos, but in the middle, supporting things that users think of as text that are not technically text, like Word documents and PowerPoint documents.
They probably think a
PDFs.
PDF scan of a piece of paper is
Well,
text,
and right,
because
and
it's
so
got
there's-
text in it, but unless your
Then
server
there's-
can OCR it.
Exactly. So then
Um,
there's a difference between a PDF that's text-based and a PDF that's
Yeah,
image-based.
And
So-
users don't know that.
Yeah, this is Jim Fenton. I don't think we can satisfy user expectations there because, I mean, the file could be a zipped PDF. And, what compression formats are you supporting and all those things? I don't think it's possible or reasonable for the Jmap server to understand all of the different ways that these things could be expressed. So I don't think, I think it's a great aspiration that Dave expresses there to try and satisfy user expectations, but I'm not sure it's possible to do.
Well, so that's why I think the right answer is to have a discussion of this in the document and then let servers figure out what they're going to do. Because there's really no way you're going to convey to the user what's going to happen. The user is just going to be happy with or surprised with the search results. Or Ted says disappointed by.
Almost
Yes,
always,
exactly.
yes.
So do we actually want to discuss that other issue? Neil, Pete, who else was commenting? Jeff, I think, was in there. Pete is getting up to the mic. Yay-hoo.
Pete doesn't have to implement this crap. And, I showed what I think is legit JSON syntax. And if that's going to be a complete pain in the rear for someone to implement, or for most people to implement, then okay, hack away. The hack looks like the potential for real implementation bugs. It just feels that way.
So as having a look at that, the suggestion basically is if there's no group, then it's just an address. And if there is a group, then it has different keys inside the object, and that key is a group that then has a list of addresses inside it, which is very much a direct mapping of how it looks in the text. The downside there is that you need to be able to both go through the top level keys and inspect inside groups to find things that have email addresses on them if you're searching through for a list of email addresses. Rick.
It's Rick. Yeah, it's right. So I look at what we have right now, and it does look, as someone said, like a hack, and it's clearly one that works, and it's one that we're kind of used to. I wonder, and I don't want to get too far into like specific alternatives, but isn't a very simple way to solve this problem to have a list of objects? Every object has a name and email address, so it's like a normal address. And if it's in a group, you give it an additional key of group name. So if you have a run of 7 addresses and the first 3 are a group, they all have the same group name. And then the next one doesn't, you've left the group. Like there is a small anomaly problem where you could have some out of order, or you could, do goofy things, but I think it's much less of a hack. And if you don't know about groups in your client, you've just flattened them and probably no harm done.
So this came up on the mailing list. The case where you have 2 groups with the same name in direct succession, you can't tell where the boundary between those 2 same name groups is.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut the discussion off because there's actually no transition time between this session and the one next door that's sharing. So we have to cut it off and move next door or go elsewhere if you're sane. Sorry about that. We should continue this on the list.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That's our hour. Lots of discussion to follow. Oh, we had 16 people. And some remotes.